Hey everybody, I'm Suzanne, Unit Coordinator and ELA for Understanding Behaviour for Classroom Practice. Today we're going to go through the Assessment 2 details, and next week you'll be able to attend a question and answer session so that you can discuss it a little further with your ELA. All right, I'm just going to share the PowerPoint now. Okay. So here we are. It's Assessment 2 for Understanding Behaviour for Classroom Practice, and Assessment 2 is a folio. Okay, so the unit content that is relevant for Assessment 2 is anything in week 3 to 6. So it's any content that's related to analysing principles, policies and practices, demonstrating how these might be used in establishing and maintaining a productive learning environment, and planning learning environments that promote preventative models of behaviour management. So there are a few activities that are really linked in quite closely with the assessment in week 4, 5 and 6. So if you actually complete these activities online and also get the feedback from your ELA and from your peers, you'll find that it really does help you prepare for the assessment, especially the week 4 activity. It's almost a bit of a practice go at writing in the way that you would write for your assessment. So please be sure to get on board with those activities because we do find that students who actually are a part of those discussions actually do very well in their assessments, generally speaking. So get on board with that and get some feedback prior to submitting your assessment. Okay, Assessment 2 is a folio. It is due at 5 p.m. Monday the 16th of January, week 9. So clearly it's going to be challenging for a few people because of the Christmas holidays and so on that you'll be managing. I'm sure there'll be lots of family events going on, but even so, just see if you can get yourself organised and work towards that due date. Plan your time carefully. Unfortunately, if it is late this time, penalties will be applied. You may have found that your ELA was a little bit more lenient with Assessment 1, just because we like to try to take the educative approach to begin with. But now that you've all been in the unit for quite a while and you have a full understanding of the due dates, etc., you really do need to get those assessments in on time. Otherwise, you might be at risk of getting a penalty, and the penalties are actually quite high. If you need a 48-hour extension, that's probably not going to be too difficult, but in terms of long extensions, we won't be able to give out any long extensions based on the fact that it's the holidays or anything like that, or you're going away. Unfortunately, the policy won't really cover you for that. Long extensions are generally only for people who are having some extenuating circumstances. So please do try and manage your time to meet that due date. The same with the word limit. Now you do need to stick very strictly to your 2,000 plus or minus 10%. If you go over that limit, the ELA is not obliged to read any more of the text. Just to keep it nice and fair for everybody, make sure that you're writing nice and succinctly so that you can keep to your word limit. Okay, so the purpose of this assessment is to produce an insightful curation of information and resources in relation to behaviour. So you need to gather up some information into a folio and link this in with theoretical frameworks and practices. So the idea here is that you're able to demonstrate an ability to understand and choose an appropriate models for responding to and supporting a range of behaviours. We're looking for a high level of analysis and rationale for including those resources, and it will enable you to apply different principles and practices in the learning environment. So this assessment really is a step up from Assessment 1. In Assessment 1, you became very good at looking at and analysing behaviour, using theory and considering sociocultural constructs in relation to that behaviour. So this is really the next step now. Now that you're quite good at that, and there'll be a little bit more of that also in this assessment, looking at behaviour and explaining it based on sociocultural constructs. However, the next step in this is also, once you have an understanding of what might be behind that behaviour, then you will be looking to find resources that specifically support the behaviour, or to help, obviously improve any kind of disruptive or negative behaviours, and preferably to prevent behaviours, those types of unwanted behaviours, before they happen. So the next step here is really for you to be able to demonstrate that you know how to find resources and rationalise why they might be useful to a student with a particular behaviour that you're wanting to monitor or to prevent. Okay, so for this assessment, you find or create 4 folio resources. That's 4, 1 for each of the scenarios. So it is best that you choose the 4 different scenarios and provide a resource for each one of those scenarios. A resource can be something that is used by the student, the teacher, or both. So it's a resource that either the teacher and student could use together, or they could use separately. So each item in the folio needs to have a descriptive rationale that discusses how it can be related to supporting and understanding the behaviour. So once you've chosen your resource, you need to really convince the reader that that resource will really support the behaviour in the classroom. And herein you can actually draw on the theory again that's covered in the relevant topics. So support your rationale using theory. Therefore, you'll need to have some scholarly literature supporting your rationale. So we're looking for extended research again as part of this assessment. You may find that the resource or the resources that you identify need some modifications to actually support the child in the scenario, which is how it would be if you were actually a teacher in a classroom. Often the resources that you might find aren't a one-size-fits-all, and you'll need to maybe make some modifications to ensure that your resource really does support the behaviour of the individual child, or it could be a few children. So yeah, so you have that choice to use an existing resource. If the existing resource really does support the behaviour without any modifications, that's fine. If not, you should add some modifications to consider that individual child, or you could create your own. So either way is fine. It's absolutely fine to create your own resource as long as it really does support that particular child and the behaviours that are identified. Okay, so the way that you format the folio is to clearly label the scenario and the topic of the scenario and the week that scenario was in. So include all of the relevant information, for example, where that resource was found. Your folio should not just be a collection of resources. Each resource has to have a complete rationale. That's really the most important thing. The resource itself, obviously it needs to be a resource that is suitable and practical, and it clearly supports the behaviour. But what we're really looking at closely is how you have described the behaviour and how that behaviour is being supported by the resource and how it's being used. So you really do need to have a solid rationale as to how and why you've decided to use that resource. Okay, each resource must be linked to one specific scenario and to the relevant literature. There is no need for a cover page in Turnitin, which is what is being used for picking up any kind of plagiarism through Canvas. So no need for a cover page. We would again discourage writing in first person. In fact, really you shouldn't be doing that at all for this assignment. So we do not use the terms me, I, we, our, or you. So it needs to be written in third person. And that is the case for all of the assessments in this unit. It would be the best way to really structure this folio is one scenario at a time. So label the scenario, provide or explain the resource and the rationale, and then the reference list. So each scenario should have a reference list of its own. We will also send out an example of what it looks like to structure the folio in that way. So it's basically, if you consider each of the resources or each of the scenarios is one piece of writing with the reference list underneath each one of those scenarios. A few tips. It's really important that you don't simply list and describe your resource. In a way, this assignment has a persuasive tone, so you do need to very clearly actually rationalise why you've decided on that resource. Try not to spend too much of your word count on actually describing it, because that's not as important as being able to demonstrate your understandings of how to use that resource for the particular behaviour. The assessment is designed for you to think critically about the behaviour in the scenario and the resource you would use in response to in a classroom setting. Just be a little bit wary of some resources or some approaches that may not be as rigorous as others. For example, try not to look towards a resource that might be a quick fix solution. So, for example, I'm going to apply for more funding for this student, or I'm going to send the student to the principal, or I'm going to employ a teacher aide. These are really quick fixes and something that they're approaches that don't really get to the heart of the matter. We really need to see a resource that is utilised by the teacher or by the student, and it's really, you know, a detailed solution rather than just a quick fix. Also, try to choose, look for teaching pedagogies that have some depth and that are powerful if possible. Try to stay away from things like a sticker chart or a list of rules, because these are really quite simplistic and we're looking for a little bit more depth than that. We also need to see academic underpinning throughout your resources or throughout your rationales, and if academic research isn't evident, you will not be able to pass this assessment. It doesn't hurt to draw on your ELA to question whether your resource meets the assessment criteria. The word resource can cover a whole number of, or it can take a whole number of forms. It could be a student resource, such as say an app on an iPad, or it could be a teacher resource such as an online learning environment like a community of practice. It could be an observation chart. It could be a number of things. It could even be a policy, a school policy that you use as a resource. It could be any number of, or it could take any number of forms. But again, I think this is a discussion to really have in your discussions in Canvas, because I think it's a whole conversation around what is a resource or what could be classified as a resource. I would say that would probably also be covered at the Q&A session, but it would be great if you can start that conversation up in your discussion area with your ELA. What is a resource? What would classify as a resource? And you know, what resources are suitable for each of the scenarios? That can be discussed as well. Okay, the submission is the same way that you submitted assessment 1, through the assignments area and then click on assessment 2 folio. If you want to put in a practice submission to check your originality score, there is a practice session, a practice area that's available where you can do that, and you can actually submit in there a number of times until you're satisfied with the originality score that you get in Turnitin. For your final assessment, it would be very helpful if you could label the assessment with the word final. That just helps us to understand that you really have put in your final piece of work and it's ready to be marked. So the assessment criteria is, first of all, making an appropriate selection of your resource. As I've said before, it could be a theory, policy, it could be an example of practice, a strategy, or an in-class physical tool, and it matches the scenario. So it's important that your resource does match nicely to the scenario. There's a development of and discussion around understanding and supporting behaviour in primary contexts. There's an understanding of the nature and development of behaviour in learners and how to respond to them. And you're also being assessed on appropriate writing conventions, including referencing, spelling, grammar, etc. Okay, I think we'll go through the rubric quickly. However, I think we'll probably discuss this more at the Q&A session. So if you have any more questions around the rubric, please do be sure to let your ELA know that you have these questions so that we can address them in the Q&A session next week. But in terms of the pass level, to actually be awarded a pass, each item must have a descriptive rationale and discusses how each of the resources can be related to supporting and understanding behaviour. It does say specific examples need to be included that relate to preventative models. So what that means, preventative models, is, for example, if you had some bullying behaviour in your classroom, a non-preventative behaviour, a non-preventative approach would be to try and punish the bully after it's already happened, or to take some action, maybe a behaviour management plan on the child that's being seen as the bully in response to the bullying that's already happened. Whereas if it was a preventative model, there might be some strategy or some lesson or activity that you have happening in your classroom that involves all the children and is around the idea of preventing bullying from happening in the first place. So that use of the preventative model is very important when you're choosing your resources. Try to choose resources that concentrate on preventing sort of behaviour that's negative or disruptive from happening in the first place. Each item discusses principles, policy and practice. Look, it does say principles, policy and practice, but if you have two of those in the discussion of the item, you won't need to have all three in every single scenario. So as long as you are covering principles, policies and practices somewhere along the line in your submission, that will be fine. But just keep that in mind throughout, that you do need to be discussing all three in relation to scenarios. Again, we'll talk about that more next week at the Q&A, but don't get worried about trying to have a principle and a policy and a practice for every single scenario. You do have quite a limit on word count, so that would be very tricky. The rationale indicates some understanding of behaviours in learners and how to respond to them appropriately. And the work draws on an appropriate range of sources. So once again, if there's no academic underpinning of your folio, it is unable to pass. And the written expression needs to be at a decent level, consistent with university standards. Okay, I'm just going to whip through the rest, and I think you'll be able to discuss this more at your Q&A session next week. So in the credit range, we're looking for more sophistication in the writing. The rationales are descriptive and comprehensive. They probably persuade the reader more than they would at pass level. And the rationale indicates consistent understanding of behaviours and how to respond to them. So at this level, word choice is more deliberate and there are fewer errors in the APA referencing and in the writing in general. At the distinction level, the folio has carefully integrated the rationale and the quotes and the supporting evidence is much more in-depth and comprehensive. The rationale includes an understanding of behaviour in learners and how to respond to them. with very clear links to theory and contemporary perspectives and practices. So when we say contemporary, in terms of research, we're usually looking within about the last 10 years. And there is a much wider range of resources that have been drawn on to support the writing at the distinction level. At the high distinction level, the folio is more synthesized and carefully integrated, and once again, just a more sophisticated discussion on the resources and on understanding the behaviour. So the rationale is more fluent and has sophisticated links to theory and contemporary practices. In a high distinction, we would pretty much expect to see no errors. The APA referencing would be perfect, and the use of English is quite sophisticated. English and language in general is quite sophisticated. One more thing I forgot to say before we go is that if you would like to include an image of your resource, that would be quite fine. It does help us when we are reading your assessments to see a visual. However, it's not compulsory, and it won't actually earn you any more extra marks, but it does help us a lot if there's a nice image of your resource, perhaps straight under the scenario. So you've got your heading, your scenario, an image, and then the rationale, and then the reference list for each of those scenarios. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching, everybody, and start preparing your questions, and we'll see you at the Q&A Collaborate next week. Thanks, guys. Bye.